They drugged my 10-year-old son and our Labrador, stuffed them in a car, dumped them across state lines like garbage, all because the HOA president said they were a disturbance to neighborhood aesthetics. What they didn't know, I'm the county sheriff, and I was about to make their lives a living hell, using every legal thread they thought they could manipulate. It sounds made up, doesn't it? Like some half-baked Reddit post written at 2 a.m. by someone who drank too much Mountain Dew. But I wish it was fiction. I really do. Because no one wants to be the guy who has to explain to a sobbing child why someone decided he and the dog didn't fit the neighborhood vibe and thought the best solution was abduction. And as if that's not enough of a horror show, the fact that it was all cloaked under the smug, paperwork-thick excuse of HOA regulations? That part still makes my blood boil. I've arrested drug dealers with more empathy than the woman who orchestrated this. Let me rewind. 2 months ago, I moved into a quiet cul-de-sac with my son, Drew, and our very spoiled Labrador, Copper. I bought the house sight unseen during a property auction after my wife passed. Something about needing a fresh start without needing to drive too far from the department. It seemed like a decent place. The lawn was tidy, the sidewalks clean, and the neighbors, well, from a distance, they smiled. The kind of place you imagine raising your kid in peace. Turns out, it was Stepford, but with power-hungry retirees wielding clipboard-sized egos. My first real introduction to the HOA came 3 days after we moved in, when a letter arrived stating my front-facing trash bins violated the community's harmonious appearance agreement. You'd think I left rotting animal carcasses by the curb the way they reacted. No, just 2 black bins, temporarily out while I wrangled a mattress up the stairs. I laughed and tossed the letter, until another came the next day. Then a fine. Then an invitation to re-educate myself on community guidelines. The queen of this well-manicured little kingdom was Marla Avery, HOA president, professional complainer, and woman with a resting expression that screamed lemon juice and spite. She introduced herself like she was revealing royalty. Crisp blouse, clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning me and Drew like we were mold on her hydrangeas. She called Drew's sidewalk chalk vandalism, said Kappa's barking during playtime was auditory pollution, and even claimed the color of our front door was unsettling. Unsettling. It's navy blue. Not blood red. Not graffiti. Navy. My first instinct was to tell her I worked homicide and had seen unsettling. But I bit my tongue. Tried to play nice. Over the next few weeks, the letters piled up. Drew got scolded by another HOA member for playing tag, too energetically, near the community fountain. Copper got cited for walking off-leash in our own backyard, which I didn't even know was possible. Then came the HOA mediation meeting, which was less about solving problems and more like being berated by 6 people who took the word regulation as gospel. Marla did most of the talking, flipping through bylaws like they were scripture. I couldn't help but ask, do y'all just sit around inventing new rules, or is there a bingo card for this? No one laughed. Figures. I tried to keep Drew out of it, told him to just ignore the angry grown-ups and enjoy the backyard. Copper too. But it's hard to ignore harassment when it comes to your doorstep, literally. I found a note taped to my windshield one morning that read, "Some families just don't fit in here." No name. No signature. Just HOA letterhead and veiled venom. I reported it, of course. Filed a formal complaint, but surprise, it was investigated by the same board that issued the paper. According to them, it lacked sufficient evidence to warrant concern. Then came the moment that snapped my patience like a dry twig. It was a Tuesday. I had a late call about a stolen vehicle across town, didn't get home until 1 a.m. The house was quiet. I assumed Drew was asleep. Copper too. Nothing looked off. But when I went to check on him the next morning, the bed was empty. No Drew. No Copper. No note. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe he'd gone out for a walk. Though he never did that without telling me. Maybe he took Copper to the park. I checked both. Nothing. Called his friends. Checked the usual haunts. Nothing. That calm cop training? Gone. I tore through town like a bat out of hell, alerting dispatch, issuing an Amber Alert, launching a full protocol. I even pulled surveillance feeds from local businesses. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, trying not to imagine the worst. By morning, we got a hit on a camera near the clubhouse. An HOA board member named Greg, a retired mailman with too much time on his hands, was caught walking Drew and Copper toward the parking lot. Drew looked sleepy, wobbly. Copper didn't even bark. They were then seen getting into a van. A white rental with no plates. And that was it. I confronted Marla that afternoon. She was pruning her roses like she didn't have a care in the world. When I demanded to know where my son and dog were, she didn't flinch. Just gave this smug little shrug and said, "Perhaps you should raise them more quietly. They've been safely relocated. For the greater peace of the community." I thought I misheard her. Relocated? Was she talking about a child or an abandoned sofa? I wanted to rip the roses out of her hand. Instead, I smiled. Because that's when it hit me, she really thought this was legal. She really believed the HOA gave her the right to relocate human beings like they were debris after a storm. And if she was bold enough to say that to my face, it meant she was sloppy somewhere. I could find it. I just had to follow the threads. And that's when Greg's van was found. 3 counties over. Abandoned near a gas station. The clerk said a weird old couple dropped off a kid and a dog at an animal rescue center and claimed the boy belonged to the state now. They left before the staff could get their names. And Drew? He was found inside, crying, confused, asking for me. Copper was sedated. They drugged both of them. No food. No water. Just a note in Drew's pocket that said, "Maybe now you'll listen." I held my boy like I was afraid he'd disappear again. I didn't cry. But something inside me broke clean in half. This wasn't just HOA pettiness anymore. This was criminal. This was war. And the best part? They didn't just mess with a father. They messed with a sheriff. Next thing I did? I walked into the HOA's annual budget meeting with a warrant in one hand, and something even nastier in the other. I didn't kick the door down. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked in, slow and steady, like a man with all the time in the world and the law on his side. That's the thing about people like Marla. They expect fireworks, shouting, maybe some threats. What they never expect is quiet rage. They never expect cold, calculated payback, the kind that doesn't break laws but uses them like scalpels. And I had plenty. I'd spent the last 12 hours pulling every thread she didn't know existed. The moment I entered that HOA meeting, all heads turned. Clipboards froze midair. Marla was at the front, halfway through a motion about repainting community benches in calming eggshell tones, because apparently Gray was too emotionally aggressive. Her smile twitched when she saw me, and I knew then, she hadn't expected me to bounce back this fast. She definitely didn't expect me to walk in with a file folder thick enough to kill a cockroach and a warrant signed by Judge Holloway, who just so happened to owe me a favor from a little thing involving his nephew's DUI and a lost snake. I didn't say a word at first. Just placed the folder on the table, let the sound echo through their vinyl-floored sanctum like a judge's gavel. Marla's eyes narrowed. She said, "This is a private meeting," and I responded, "Not anymore." The room went silent. Someone coughed. A guy in a windbreaker looked like he was debating whether to run or wet himself. I started with the basics. Illegal detainment of a minor, unauthorized transport of a child across state lines, sedating an animal without veterinary clearance, impersonating legal authority, and unlawful use of HOA funds to rent a van. And that wasn't even the juicy stuff. See, during my all-nighter, I dug deeper. Pulled HOA financial records under the Freedom of Information Act, thanks to the way they'd registered as a quasi-public community board, and what I found was, frankly, insulting. Marla and her crew had been funneling funds into beautification projects that never existed. $40,000 had been allocated to a Zen rock garden that was allegedly installed behind the clubhouse. I went there. It was just dirt. Someone had maybe thrown a pebble at it once. $1,000 went to pet waste disposal consultation. Consultation. As if they flew in a poop expert to judge our dog's bowel habit. I presented every shred of evidence, one page at a time, while Marla's carefully constructed Botox smile began to crack. The others didn't look any better. Greg, the board member who walked Drew and Copper into that van, tried to stammer something about just following orders, and I cut him off with one line. That defense didn't work at Nuremberg, Greg. It won't work now. That shut him up real quick. They had nothing. No lawyers present. No alibis that didn't reek of desperation. And the best part? The whole thing was being recorded. I didn't even hide it. Set my phone right on the table and let it run. Marla tried to protest, said this was harassment, said I was abusing my power. I told her I wasn't here as a sheriff. I was here as a father. But if she wanted to dance the legal waltz, I had 2 left feet and a badge that could shut this entire place down. She shut up after that. After the meeting imploded into a mess of whispering and sweaty foreheads, I stepped outside and called in the cavalry. A full forensic audit team. The HOA clubhouse, their files, their hard drives, everything was now under investigation. Residents started coming out of their homes, watching, whispering. Some were confused. Others looked relieved. A woman 2 doors down came up to me and said she always suspected Marla of something shady, but didn't have the nerve to say anything. Apparently, her daughter's wheelchair ramp had been removed without warning because it didn't fit the community's symmetry. That one nearly made me go back inside and lose my cool. But this wasn't about shouting or revenge fantasies. This was about dismantling their entire little empire piece by piece. And while the investigators dug into documents and the board scrambled for excuses, I focused on the next step, proving intent. Because kidnapping and sedating a child? That's a different level. I needed to prove that Marla had planned this, not just condoned it after the fact. So I started interviewing. Staff at the rescue center where Drew and Copper were dumped gave descriptions that matched Greg and another woman, one of the treasurers. I got security footage from the gas station where the van was spotted. Tracked the rental back to the HOA's bank card. Found a signed agreement from Marla authorizing transport for community safety. They even listed Drew's name as a disruptive youth, which is ironic, considering he's quieter than a librarian on sedatives. And Copper? They called him a public menace with unpredictable saliva patterns. But then came the final nail. An internal email between Marla and her board discussing possible relocation strategies for problem families. I found it buried on a backup drive labeled Holiday Planning. Hidden in plain sight. The phrasing was vague, but the implication was clear. They'd been doing this for months. Other families. Other pets. It wasn't just me. It was a pattern. A sick, systematic cleansing of anyone who didn't match their suburban utopia fantasy. I sent the email to the DA. He called me within 10 minutes and said, "Do you want to make the arrest, or should I?" I told him I wanted to. Not because I needed the satisfaction, but because I wanted Marla to see the look on my face when it all came crashing down. When every smug smile and passive-aggressive rulebook citation turned into a booking number and a mugshot. When the woman who tried to rip my son from me realized her HOA code violations had morphed into criminal charges that would follow her for the rest of her life. But before I could make the move, something unexpected happened. Someone leaked the story. Maybe a resident. Maybe a board member trying to save their own skin. Either way, the media got wind. By morning, there were cameras on my lawn, a reporter outside the clubhouse, and a viral hashtag. Hashtag Sheriff Dad vs. HOA. Suddenly, this wasn't just a local scandal. It was national. People started digging through Marla's past. Her time on the HOA in another state, where 3 families left abruptly and filed no complaints. Her shady landscaping business that got sued for misusing city grant. The skeletons were practically doing the Macarena. I should have felt triumphant. But all I could think about was Drew, how he still flinched when he heard a car start, how copper stuck to his side like Velcro, how our quiet life had been shattered because a group of petty tyrants decided they were above consequences. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about exposing them. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure no one else ever had to go through what we did. Not in my county. Not on my watch. So I suited up, filed the final reports, wrote the warrants, and drove to Marla's house at 6:03 a.m. sharp. But when I got there, something was off. The door was ajar. The mailbox overflowing. Her car? Gone. No sign of Greg either. It was like they vanished. And then I got the call. A neighbor had seen them packing bags late the night before. Heading east. Marla wasn't going to wait around to be arrested. She was running. But what she didn't know, I'd already called the state patrol. And the moment she crossed the county line, she was mine. Marla thought she could run. That she could vanish behind a steering wheel, a pair of oversized sunglasses, and a new zip code. She probably imagined herself sipping iced tea in another HOA, charming some other group of suburban tyrants into thinking she was their gift from the heavens. What she forgot was that I'm not just a father. I'm a sheriff with multi-jurisdictional reach, and more importantly, I'm a man with a grudge and a network of colleagues who owe me favors. The moment she crossed that county line, the moment she thought she was safe, her name popped up in a system she didn't even know existed. There's something poetic about getting caught by the very bureaucracy you worship. She was pulled over in a gas station just 15 miles outside of our jurisdiction, trying to top off her tank and keep moving. Greg was in the passenger seat, sweating like a popsicle in July. The car was packed with boxes, labeled files, and even a shredder, because of course they tried to destroy evidence while on the run. But they weren't criminal masterminds. They were HOA board members. The worst thing they'd ever tried to destroy before this was a mailbox that didn't match the rest. The state trooper recognized them from the APB we put out. By the time I arrived, they were already cuffed and babbling excuses like two toddlers caught in the pantry. I took my time walking up to her. No rush. Just the slow, deliberate steps of someone who already knew how this ended. Marla locked eyes with me and still tried to play the victim. Said she was being persecuted, that this was a witch hunt, that I was abusing my authority. I let her finish her tantrum, then handed her the arrest warrant and said, word for word, "This isn't a witch hunt. It's pest control." She didn't say another word after that. The ride back was quiet except for Greg softly crying and muttering something about not wanting to go to jail because of a chalk drawing. By the time we returned to town, the entire story had snowballed into a full-blown media circus. Local outlets were doing nightly updates. Couple national ones picked it up too. My inbox was flooded with interviews I wasn't taking and messages from people across the country thanking me for standing up to HOA tyranny. Apparently, there's a very large, very angry population of people out there who've had their lives ruined by pastel-color-loving community dictators. Who knew? Marla and Greg were booked, fingerprinted, and photographed, and I made sure they were put into holding cells right next to each other. Not because it was necessary, but because I wanted them to stew in their own silence and maybe think about how it all went so wrong. As I processed the paperwork, I couldn't help but let a small grin slip when I saw their faces on the booking forms. The Queen and her knight, now inmates 1 and 2. But the job wasn't over. Not even close. The HOA's charter still technically existed, and the rest of the board wasn't entirely innocent. Most of them were guilty by association, sure, but a couple of them had signed off on specific budget approvals and surveillance actions that crossed several legal lines. I issued subpoenas. I pulled hard drives. I had my tech team comb through every shred of communication that had passed through that clubhouse since the day I moved in. What we found was enough to make a Netflix miniseries. There were emails describing residents as aesthetic liabilities. One thread where Marla referred to a family of 5 as feral apartment types that slipped through the cracks. Another where Greg suggested installing motion-activated sprinklers to encourage undesirables to move faster through common spaces. These weren't just bad people. They were actively engineering a neighborhood designed to exclude anyone they didn't personally approve of. Once I had everything in hand, I called a community meeting. Not at the HOA clubhouse. That place was now sealed as an active investigation site, but at the town hall. I didn't advertise it with flyers or notices. Word of mouth was enough. The place was packed. Angry residents, curious neighbors, reporters with microphones. They weren't even hiding anymore. I stepped onto that stage like a prosecutor ready to deliver the final blow, and I gave them everything. The surveillance footage, the emails, the financial fraud, the illegal bylaws. I didn't hold back. People gasped. Some cursed. A few laughed, but not out of joy, more out of the shock of realizing they'd been ruled by a woman who operated more like a dictator than a neighbor. I ended it with one simple statement. The HOA was officially dissolved by emergency court order, its charter revoked, and a city oversight committee would temporarily manage the community until further elections could be held. I made sure to point out that any future HOA would be legally prohibited from recreating any of Marla's absurd policies. The reaction was pure chaos. People clapped, cheered, some even cried. I had strangers thanking me, hugging me, shaking my hand like I'd just rescued them from a cult. But what mattered most to me wasn't the applause. It was seeing Drew sitting in the front row, safe, smiling, and proud. And Copper? He was there too, tail wagging like a metronome, blissfully unaware that he was now the unofficial mascot of suburban justice. I could have stopped there. Could have walked away, taken the win, gone back to being a quiet single dad with a badge and a barbecue. But I had one last card to play. At the HOA auction, where all the assets were being sold off to repay legal fees and settlement claims, I showed up with a check in hand. Bought the clubhouse. Outbid a real estate agent who wanted to turn it into a yoga studio. When the gavel hit the podium, I owned the place. And then I tore it down. Not literally, too many permits, but symbolically. I converted it into a community dog park. Replaced the rule books with doggy waste bags. Put up a mural of Drew and Copper playing in the grass, a giant painted sign above them that read, "Disturbances Welcome." The opening day had music, free hot dogs, and more laughter than that HOA ever tolerated in a decade. Kids were playing. Dogs were barking. And not a single clipboard was in sight. But even then, it wasn't quite over. A week later, I got a call from a woman in a nearby county. Said she'd just moved into a new neighborhood and something felt off. Sent me a picture. It was Marla. In a different blouse. Smiling next to a new HOA sign. Different place, same game. She was already trying to start over. Already trying to climb back onto her little throne. And that's when I knew exactly what to do next. Because if she thought I was going to let her rewrite the same story in a new zip code, she clearly hadn't read the final chapter yet. I didn't hesitate. The moment I saw that photo of Marla smiling next to another pristine HOA sign, I knew she hadn't learned a damn thing. A new subdivision in a different county, different name, same blueprint. She had this uncanny ability to slither back into power like mold creeping across drywall. And the worst part? She was already calling herself acting president and writing up suggested rulebooks before the neighborhood had even fully moved in. This wasn't just a one-off power trip. This was her identity, her addiction. And like any addict, she was already looking for her next fix. So I called the woman who sent me the photo, a school teacher named Hannah who had moved in with her husband and 2 kids only a few weeks earlier. Sweet family. Normal. Thought they'd found a quiet place to raise their children. That is, until Marla knocked on their door holding a clipboard and politely explained that their front-facing swing set might conflict with the future visual cohesion of the neighborhood. That was code for, You've just landed on Marla's radar and your life's about to get regulated into oblivion. I told Hannah to hang tight, sent her a packet of everything I had on Marla. The charges, the arrest records, the HOA dissolution documents, the press clippings. Every scar she'd left behind. Meanwhile, I made a few calls. County records showed Marla had registered a brand new homeowner association under a different name, using a shell address and an alias that was laughably lazy. She went with M. A. Avery, as if initials were an invisibility cloak. But her digital fingerprints were all over it. I looped in the DA from the original case, who was more than happy to reopen the file, especially after discovering Marla had skipped out on her final court-mandated community service hours and failed to pay her restitution fines. Technically, that made her a fugitive from civil judgment. Not exactly Al Capone levels of crime, but enough to put her on a legal leash again. We didn't need to wait long. Within a week, she held her first HOA introductory meeting at a local community center. I showed up early, plain clothes, ball cap, sunglasses, sat in the back with a cup of bad coffee, and watched the circus unfold. There she was, standing at the front with her clipboard, handing out freshly printed copies of her self-authored neighborhood guidelines. The language was eerily familiar. Restrictions on yard toys. Pet noise limits. No street parking longer than 15 minutes. One clause even stated that children must remain inside after 8 p.m. to reduce community disruption. She delivered it all with that same syrupy smile, like she was doing everyone a favor. A woman nearby raised her hand and asked if these rules were legally binding. Marla said yes, and even dropped my name, claiming she had cooperated with local law enforcement to ensure full legality. That was my cue. I stood up and walked straight to the front, pulled off the cap, and watched her face drop like a busted chandelier. The room went dead silent. I asked her to repeat what she just said about law enforcement. She tried to laugh it off, called it a misunderstanding, and I cut her off, told the room who I was, what she'd done, and why she was banned from ever serving on any HOA board again. I handed out printed copies of the injunction and the court findings. The murmurs began, and within minutes, her carefully staged meeting descended into chaos. Marla stormed out, clipboard clutched like a security blanket, probably realizing that the illusion of authority only works when people haven't seen behind the curtain. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. The people there had seen enough. A week later, her fledgling HOA was dismantled before it even had time to laminate its first newsletter. She disappeared again, and this time I didn't bother chasing her. She could run, but she'd never outrun her reputation. That kind of infamy clings like smoke. Back home, things finally settled into something that resembled peace. Drew started sleeping through the night again, though he still double-checks the locks before bed. Cop is back to his normal, obnoxious self, barking at squirrels like they owe him money. The community dog park is thriving. Every time I see a kid laughing, a dog rolling in the grass, or a neighbor chatting over the fence without fear of getting fined for wearing the wrong colored hoodie, I know we built something better than what Marla tried to control. The mural we painted on the clubhouse wall remains untouched. Drew and Copper midrun, frozen in joy, above the words, "Disturbances welcome." People take pictures in front of it, tag it online. It's become something of a local landmark. A reminder that sometimes the best kind of justice is the kind that barks and throws chalk. I still get letters from people across the country. Stories of their own HOA nightmares. Some are funny. Some are tragic. All of them are variations of the same theme. People who let power go to their heads and forgot that neighborhoods are supposed to be lived in, not governed like prisons. Every once in a while, someone asks me if I'd ever consider running for mayor or something bigger. I laugh. I've got no interest in politics. I've already seen what happens when people chase titles instead of principles. I'll keep my badge and my barbecue grill, thank you very much. But I did start something new. A small side project. It's not official or flashy, but it's something I care about. I help other communities review their HOA contract. Volunteer legal literacy. Just a couple hours a week. It's amazing how many folks sign their lives away without realizing it. One guy thanked me for saving him from agreeing to a clause that allowed the HOA to inspect his fridge during hygiene reviews. I told him to move immediately. As for Marla, the last I heard, she tried applying for a position on a neighborhood council 2 towns over and was promptly rejected. Word travels fast now. Her name's become a cautionary tale. The woman who went too far. Who thought she could control everything and ended up losing everything instead. She underestimated what one angry dad, one loyal dog, and one well-wielded badge could do. And if you're wondering whether I ever got personal satisfaction out of it, whether seeing her cuffed, exposed, and publicly humiliated made up for what she did to my kid, the answer's complicated. Nothing will ever erase that fear I felt when I found Drew missing. Nothing makes up for hearing him cry himself to sleep for days. But justice? That helped. Not because it was revenge, but because it showed people like her that they can't play God with their neighbors' lives and walk away untouched. My job's still the same. I still patrol the same streets. Still stop by the diner on Thursdays for burnt coffee and overcooked eggs. Still show up at school events, dog in tow, pretending not to get emotional when Drew waves at me from the stage. But every now and then, I catch someone new at the dog park, staring up at the mural, reading the words and smiling. And I think, yeah, this is what we protected. This is what we fought for. So if you ever find yourself up against an HOA gone rogue, or a Karen with too much power and not enough soul, remember this. Badges can't solve everything. But they can sure as hell expose a lie. And sometimes, that's all it takes to bring the whole fake empire crashing down.